Marriage. It is what it is. It works out for some people, and not so much for others. A legally binding commitment between two individuals that results in tremendous anguish and suffering if the union wishes to separate. Statistics talk about marriages having a 50% chance of ending in divorce, which aren't very good odds if you stop to think about it. This, coupled with an unfair court system, has led to desperate people making extreme decisions in an attempt to permanently rid themselves of an unwanted spouse, while not ruining their life in the process. Taking the vow, till death do us part, quite literally. Instead of plotting a murder or hiring a hitman, what if there was a way to legitimately fight your partner to the death in a legally sanctioned battle? The stakes would be high, but ultimately the victor would be free of the person, while not spending the rest of their life in prison. Howdy, this is Dave, and in this video, we will be covering divorce by combat. In the 15th century, there was no such thing as marriage counseling, or mental health for that matter. You just lived with the card you were dealt, especially when it came to marriage. Divorces were nigh impossible to get back then. So of course the rational way of dealing with marital disputes was to let them kill each other. Divorce by combat branched off of regular trial by combat. It was part of Germanic law, and its purpose was to address harsh allegations between two contingents where there were no witnesses present to verify either of the parties' claims. Whoever won the duel would be considered correct in the matter, while the loser would die in shame. This was completely legal. It wasn't often that women were physically involved in a trial by combat situation. Generally, if a woman initiated a challenge, or was the one being challenged, she would appoint a champion to fight on her behalf. If she was married, then it was up to her husband to defend her honor. In a situation where the woman is going up against her own husband, it was doubtful that the wife would have anyone else to fight for her. Unless someone stepped forward, she would have to fight for herself. In 1467, German fencing master Hans Talhofer, who also advised the court's judicial duels, wrote a fencing book that contained illustrations depicting rules and guidelines for trial techniques. This book covered many various styles of trial by combat, with numerous weapons. One section, however, has become subject to curious scrutiny. This section covers the type of combat between a husband and wife. It doesn't take much thought to realize that men have a physical advantage over women, so an even fight would be unfair to the wife. It's plausible that she would have little to no fighting experience, and that would also stack the deck against her. To ensure the balance of power, compromises were made to help even the playing field. Talhofer's instructions played out with two scenarios. One if the husband were going to win, and one if the wife were to win. The husband would stand in a 3-foot diameter hole that was waist deep. He was provided with 3 clubs to use as weapons. But the catch was that he would have to have one arm tied behind his back. The wife, aside from being encumbered by weighted clothing, was able to move freely outside of the pit. Her weapon was a sack of rocks, 3 in fact, weighing 1 to 5 pounds, individually wrapped in cloth. If his arms or hands touched the edge of the hole, the man would have to forfeit one of his clubs to the officials. If the wife took the opportunity to strike as the man was handing over a club, she would have to surrender one of her stones. The instructions also included what style of clothing the participant should wear, which was a one-piece bodysuit and stirrup legs. It also described different tips and tricks, such as beginner mistakes to avoid, and what to do if caught in a hold. The terms and conditions for a victory are not very clear. Some say that a fight would last until one of them died. However, some say it was likely up to the judges to decide who won. We also can't rule out the possibility that wielding blunt force objects could simply just knock the opponent unconscious. It is also suggested that the illustrations provided in Talhofer's book did not focus on the rules of the combat, but mainly gave advice on different ways to win. Like if the man was able to pull the woman in the hole with him, or if the woman was able to heave the man up from the hole, possibly turning it into a grappling match. If it descended into wrestling, then the duel could be won by pinning, which is still standard practice today. There are old Germanic law books that have been used in collaboration to try and fill in the blank spaces left by the fencing book. It is uncertain how often divorce by combat actually took place, or how often it ended in death. There have been instances where it ended in death, but not through the afflictions of battle. If the wife emerged victorious, the husband could very well be dragged from his hole and taken to be executed in the town square. Let me remind you, in this time period, capital punishment had a morbid array of exceedingly unpleasant ways to die. The husband could be drawn and quartered, burned at the stake, hung, boiled alive, and if he was lucky, beheaded. Having just one of those executions would be horrible enough, but we also can't rule out the fact that they would add all sorts of cruel tortures on top of the standard execution, and even combine executions. Why just boil alive when you could be boiled prior to being hung, drawn, quartered, beheaded, and then finish it off by having your body thrown on a pyre? If the husband managed to defeat the wife, then she would be placed in her own hole and be buried alive, which results in a fairly quick and clean death that can be delayed depending on the method of burial. Like if one were to be put in a box first, as opposed to being tied up in a sack, or just throwing the body in a hole without any covering at all. If the buried could control their breathing and not panic, then they would have more time to sit there and think about how they were going to soon run out of air and asphyxiate. Not many sources have survived to mention divorce by combat. By the time the medieval period was winding down, trial by combat as a practice itself became far less common. In all honesty, it seems very unlikely that these were common affairs. Trial by combat was not a whimsical event that was used to settle petty disagreements, taking place in a forest or along a countryside. It was a fully sanctioned judicial matter that underwent tedious rules and regulations. It is also improbable that the church or state would get on board with using these trials often. Could you imagine how out of hand it would get? Even though it was only used under extreme circumstances, it was still documented just in case a situation would arise. I mean, would a master of fencing actually include this in a book if it didn't happen often enough for him to have given advice on? No matter how nasty divorces can get, I'm hoping the vast majority would agree that this is not the best way to handle it, and would prefer to just go through the expensive divorce instead of bashing away at each other. As satisfying as that would be short term, you have to understand the weight and finality of killing someone, especially in medieval style combat where you're all up close and personal with someone that you used to be closest to. It would just cause more drama and trauma. That isn't everyone's stance though. Back in the year 2020, a man named David Ostrom petitioned the district court in Shelby County, Kansas, to give him the satisfaction of settling his divorce through trial by combat. He made claims that his ex-wife, Bridget Ostrom, and her attorney, Matthew Hudson, totally destroyed him in a legal sense, regarding money and custody of their children. Because of this, he wished to confront both of them on the field of battle, where he will rend their souls from their corporal bodies. He made it clear that he did not wish to engage in battle with Bridget herself, but instead wanted her to nominate Hudson to fight in her stead. Ostrom made his case, saying that the judge had the power to grant the trial and resolve our disputes on the field of battle, legally. Also saying that trial by combat has never been explicitly banned or restricted as a right in these United States. He also asked the judge to give him 12 weeks' time in order to find or forge the weapons that they would use for the duel. He would not settle for less than swords, Japanese style, either wakizashi or katana, or maybe both. Hudson's rebuttal was to obviously have the judge reject the request. His legal response was rational, saying that the duel could end in someone's death, and that such ramifications likely outweigh those of property tax and custody issues. The whole thing was riddled with procedural errors, and the judge was not having any of it. He stated that he was not going to address either side of the claim until the errors were corrected. It's unclear what steps were not followed in order to proceed, but technically, he did not reject Ostrom's proposal for the duel. So who knows? Maybe if they get their shit together, we may be hearing about the outcome of this sometime in the future. I wouldn't count on it though. It was most likely just to get attention or something. As of writing the script for this video, no further action has been taken. And that's where I'm going to leave it off on divorce by combat. Be sure to give your significant other a hug today. If you're single, then I hope you find solace in knowing that you don't have to deal with this madness. Either way, everyone needs to go to therapy. If you like what you saw here, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, have a good one.